Okay, let's get started this evening. So good to see you. We've had a 2-week break. I feel like we've been gone forever from one another, so it's good to get back in the swing of things, and we'll have a pretty good downhill run to the end of the semester with this class, except for spring break. So looking forward to spending every week with you. Thank you for coming back. I'm always amazed. I'm never amazed that people show up for the first class. I'm always amazed that they show up for the second class. So thanks for being a part of Theological Toolbox as we get into our lesson. Greetings from the churches in Ethiopia. Really cool to see what God's doing in Ethiopia as we got to participate as a church in Bible translation that was celebrated in the Kanta region of Ethiopia, and just seeing what God's doing through theological training there. There's a lot of Muslims that are coming to know Christ in Ethiopia, which is really cool. So talked with some trainers on how they're reaching Muslims, and it's just really neat thing. So it's good to be back. Got back yesterday about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and so right now I'm asleep. I'm standing up, but I'm really asleep. It's about 3 o'clock in the morning right now. So, well, listen. Tonight we're going to talk about theology and what sometimes is referred to as theology proper. You know, when we talk about theology, sometimes we toss that word around a lot to mean all things relating to the spiritual life in the Bible. And that's true. That's fine, as it is. But when we say theology proper, we're really talking about theologos. Theos, which is God, logos, which is the Greek word for word. So tonight we're going to talk about theologos. We're going to talk about the word of the truth about God himself. All right? We're not going to talk about the truth about man or the church or salvation. We're going to talk about God. And so that's our focus. And it really is a bit embarrassing to take one class and say we're going to talk about God, and then we'll move on, right? We'll have another class where we talk about the Trinity, another talk about Jesus. But even 3 or 4 classes, how in the world can you possibly wrap your hands around God as an eternal being? But we'll do our best, and we'll have a few ideas that you can hang your hat on. And when we're done, I've got an article I want to read to you that I think really summarizes why we talk about such things. So let me open us with prayer, and then we'll jump right into our lesson. Our Father, thank you that you are our Father, that we can call you Father God, that the eternal being, the creator of the universe, has stepped into time. You've made yourself known. You've welcomed us into your presence. You've given us a relationship with yourself. And while we should and can fall on our faces before you and be in awe of you and shut our mouths and close our eyes and tremble with fear, you invite us to call you Abba, Father, and to know you personally. Thank you for that. Thank you that Jesus made that possible. And tonight, Father, we want to discover just a little bit more about you. I confess and I know that all that we'll say tonight will be so inadequate and so small, and you are so great. And so forgive us, Lord, if we think small thoughts about you. Help our minds to have an even greater view of who you are. So we commit our time to you, and we thank you in the name of your Son, Jesus. Amen. Long ago, much before maybe half of you, a third of you, there's a show on TV called The Ed Sullivan Show. Remember that? Yeah, I don't. But nonetheless, but I heard about The Ed Sullivan Show. I just thought I would do that. And there was a guy on The Ed Sullivan Show that's telling a story about a father who walked by his daughter's room, and she was in her room, and she had some crayons and paper, and she was going to town on this project, and he kind of stopped and backed up and looked in. And he said, honey, what are you doing? He said, I'm drawing. She just kept going. He goes, oh, I guess, what you drawing a picture of? She said, I'm drawing a picture of God. He said, well, sweetheart, just so you know, nobody really knows what God looks like. She said, they will in a minute. The question is, what is God like? Okay, we speak about God, we worship God, we have an idea about God, but what is God really like? If there is God, what is he like? Genesis 1:1 opens up with the assumption that there is a God. Isn't that interesting that our Bible doesn't start with a defense of God? It just assumes God is. In the beginning, God. The author there doesn't feel like there needs to be any explanation or defense, apologetic for the existence of God. It just starts off in the beginning, God. But even though the Bible states such confidence that God is, there are lots of people today, maybe even some of us in the room, that really kind of wrestle with that. And by the way, it's okay. It's okay to wrestle with, gosh, how do we really know that there's a God? In fact, I think in our spiritual lives, we even kind of go through cycles of wrestling. And that's okay. Scratch your head and wonder, what do I really know to be for certain? And what we want to do tonight is we want to take that wrestling and we want to put some texture to it to understand if God is, and if he is, what must this God be like that he is? The Bible says in Psalm 14:1 that the fool says in his heart there is no God. Only a fool with all of the evidence in front of him or her would conclude that there is no God. Psalm 14:1. Psalm 10:4 says that in his pride the wicked man does not seek God. In all of his thoughts there is no room for God. I think that's a pretty appropriate or a relevant statement for much of the world today. We just don't have room for him. We got room for Netflix. We got room for cryptocurrency. We got room for, I was going to say Dallas Cowboys, but you probably, not anymore. Not anymore. But here's the thing. We have so very little room for God. So to guard against such foolishness, or to guard against such wickedness, such evil, to exclude or dismiss God, we want to consider, how in the world do we know that God exists? And I will tell you this, that if you use the word evidence for the existence of God, if you use the word evidence in a purely scientific way, there is no evidence for the existence of God. Okay? I just want to tell you that. Because evidence, scientifically, must be able to be challenged and repeated and put to test. Do you understand that? That's how we know that such and such pressure will burst this pipe, because we're able to put it under repeated exercises. And then we say, well, we have evidence for that. But when you cannot put something under the same kind of pressure, the same kind of scrutiny, then you don't have evidence in a scientific way. However, we do have evidence that, based on good logic and reason, and what evidence we do have out there, gives us absolute confidence that God exists. So I want to give you three evidences, if you will, or three arguments for the existence of God. There are actually four arguments that are traditionally used. I'm going to leave out the one that will just drive you crazy and will not be helpful for you. Okay? So we're just going to talk about three evidences for the existence of God. The first evidence for the existence of God is what we call the cosmological argument. And you can see the word cosmos in there, okay? The world, the universe. And I like to think about the cosmological argument for the existence of God by relating cause to cause, okay? That's just an easy way for me to remember that. The cosmological argument is the argument of first cause. And the argument goes like this. It's actually a scientific argument. The argument goes like this. One of the most fundamental arguments of science, or rules or principles of science, is that every effect must have an equal and sufficient cause. Y'all heard that before? Every effect must have an equal and sufficient cause. Now, when we say effect, we mean anything that is. Okay? These glasses are an effect. They have happened. They have come to be. This marker is an effect. I am an effect. This building is an effect. It is something that is the end result of something else happening. Do you understand that? So every effect, whether it's marker, glasses, or building, must have an equal and sufficient cause for that effect to happen. Or to say it differently, stuff doesn't just happen. Okay? Every effect must have an equal and sufficient cause. And I love that because that's scientific. That's good science. Every scientist will tell you, I completely agree with that. Nothing just happens all by itself. But when God created the world, what we use, the phrase that's used as ex nihilo, literally out of nothing. So God is the grand first cause. He is the grand first cause of all things. Even if somebody wants to hold to a Big Bang, and by the way, I'm not opposed to that. If a Christian says, I hold to the Big Bang, we don't need to really have to have an argument. We have a discussion of why you think that's true, but that doesn't not make you a Christian. The question is, where did the original material for the first bang come from? Right? And even scientists that are negotiating the whole Big Bang idea have difficulty coming up with first cause. They don't have first cause, and that's a challenge because that violates their own scientific framework. I love the joke of a couple of scientists that had worked all of their lives on creating things, and they finally had decided that they could replicate creation just as it started in the very beginning. And so they got in touch with God and they said, hey, God, we'd love to show you that we think that we can replicate the earth just like you did. We can do just like what you did. And we can create humanity just like you did. And God said, you want to have this competition? They said, yeah. He said, you go first. They said, okay. They reached down and scooped up some dirt. And God goes, get your own dirt. You see, even scientists to come up with the effects that we have, whether it's human beings or single cells or the first microbes that started evolution or whatever, they still cannot figure out first cause. And the cosmological argument argues that God is an equal and sufficient cause to bring about the world the way that it exists today. Now, this is not answering, was it Big Bang, was it macroevolution, microevolution? But it doesn't care about those issues. Does everybody understand? All we're asking for is first cause. Stephen Hawking, when asked the question of what he did with first cause, do you know how he answered? When the question was asked, when he said everything comes back to single cell organisms, all starting from a single point, when he was asked, where did that single starting point come from? He himself said he wasn't completely sure. And argued, what's considered to be one of the greatest scientific minds of our generation, argued that he suspected it might have been deposited here by alien forces. Honestly, that was his answer. That's the best he could get in order to begin the process of creation. Do you understand? And yet the Bible tells us that God is first cause. Acts 17:24, for the two of you that did the bonus verse this week, the God who made the world and everything in it is Lord of heaven and earth. He made everything. He is first cause. Colossians 1:16 and 17. For by him, speaking of Jesus, for by him all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers or rulers or authorities, all things were created by him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. It's putting Jesus as the locus of all creative power and all creative existence. John 1:1, speaking of Jesus, through him all things were made, and without him nothing was made that has been made. And again, 2 Chronicles chapter 2, verse 6. But who is able to build a temple for God, since the heavens, even the highest heavens, cannot contain him? So the nature of God is that he is first cause. He is the first source, whether it's the first source of energy or the first word that was spoken so that creation comes to be. However you want to frame that for another apologetic discussion about the beginnings of the earth, you have to have scientifically first cause, and God is first cause. Now, there is a question in this mix. You're sitting with somebody on the airplane and you're talking the cosmological argument that everything has a cause, every effect must have an equal and sufficient cause. They will eventually ask what question? Who created God? Ha ha ha, Mr. Theologian. We're about to trip you up here, right? Because you just said everything's got to have an equal and sufficient cause. God exists, does he? He sure does. Well, then he must have an equal and sufficient cause. To which you do a little John 4:24. God is spirit, and those who worship him must worship him in spirit and truth. You see, spiritual forces do not fall under the same category as natural creation. Do you understand? The very essence, the very fundamental nature of being God is that he is eternal and uncreated. And you cannot apply the same Big Bang theory to God, the same scientific laws to a supernatural spirit in the universe as you do to the Grand Canyon. You can't do that. Make sense? So everything must have a beginning, and it cannot just come into being. It must have an equal and sufficient cause. Bill Johnson, who is a scientific apologist, okay? If you want to read more about the beginnings of creation, you want to read more about scientific theories that fits into a Christian context, Bill Johnson would be someone worth reading. And he said this: the world was either created by somebody out of nothing, or was created by nobody out of nothing. In other words, at some point there was nothing. I mean, even Bill Johnson realizes that if you work backwards in scientific theory, you have to have a starting point. Whether that starting point was 6,000 years ago, or 6 billion years ago, or 600 billion years ago, you have to start with a something. Do you understand? So he says the world was either created by somebody out of nothing or by nobody out of nothing. If by somebody, then we have a miracle and a miracle worker. But if by nobody, then we have a miracle but no miracle worker. And his point is, if the world just is, then you have something that violates all the laws of science and you have no cause to explain it. Make sense? That's the cosmological argument. The second argument for the existence of God is what is known as the teleological argument. This comes from the Greek word telos, which means end or final. When Jesus said, "It is finished," he is speaking, the Greek word there is telos. It comes from telos. Okay? This means end or final. And this argument is the argument of design. Okay? The first one is the argument of cause. This is the argument of design, the teleological. Okay? What is the finished product that we see? And the argument of this is that when we look at the world that we look at, we have to decide, is the world that we live in, does it reflect chaos, randomness, disconnection, happenstance, particles that were just kind of thrown together in random order? Or does the world that we live in reflect beauty, complexity, regularity? Does the world, the way that it's put together, does it reflect a kind of order that would suggest that there's intelligence and sophistication to how the world works? Or does the world suggest that it's just making stuff up as it goes? Okay? Let me give you an example. This is a classic example. You are left alone on an island. You wake up, you find yourself in a jungle area that you've never been to. You're lost. And so you begin journeying, trying to find your way out of this jungle, find your way to civilization. You travel for a day or two. You start to get frustrated, start to get a little scared. You don't know what's going on. And as you are walking through the jungle, suddenly you come to a clearing. And this clearing has vegetables. There's a row of corn. There's a row of carrots. There's a row of beets. We're not eating the beets. There's a row of radishes. And I mean, there's row after row. And what's even more remarkable is that at the end of each one of these rows, there's a little sign. And it says corn and beets and radishes and potatoes. It's right there. And they're all lined up right there. And so you think to yourself, somebody's nearby, right? I mean, somebody's farm. So you say, I tell you what I'm going to do, hug a tree. I'm going to sit down right here. I'm just going to wait for the farmer to come. Okay? It may take a day or so, but I'm going to wait for the farmer to come. And you wait. And the next day comes, and the sun goes down the next day, and no farmer shows up. And the next day comes, and the sun goes down, and no farmer shows up again. The third day, the sun comes up, you wake up and everything, and your conclusion is, I guess there's no farmer. This must have all just happened by chance. No. No, what would be your conclusion? I can't see the farmer. I have no idea where the farmer is. Maybe the farmer only comes once a month. I don't know what's going on. But the conclusion that you would reach is not, there is no farmer. Right? Because rows of vegetables don't get planted in straight lines with words spelled out on a little sign at the end of those rows. You do not see this regularity, this design, this intelligence and complexity by something that just comes to be. And in the same way, the world that we live in proves itself to be a remarkably complex, sophisticated, intelligent, well-designed creation. Okay? Scientists will tell you this, though they don't like to speak, they don't like to take the argument to the end and have all the signs point to a creator. But scientists will tell you, if we were just one fraction of the distance closer to the sun, our planet would be completely annihilated. And if we were just a half fraction away from the sun, we would be completely frozen to death. That where our planet sits in relationship to the sun and orbit and solar system and everything is perfect for the sustenance of life. When you look at the cycle of seasons that sustain our planet, when you look at the regularity of the chemicals and the elements that are found in different places in the earth, it is like our planet is set up perfectly for human life. And so the scriptures speak about this. Let me just mention, by the way, that Richard Dawkins, evolutionist Richard Dawkins, said that biology is the study of complicated things that give the appearance of having been designed by a purpose. Yeah! Science, biology is the study of sophisticated, complicated things that have the appearance that they've actually been designed for a person. Yeah, they are. They've been designed by a designer. The earth reflects the fingerprints of its architect. So the scripture tells us that. In Romans chapter 1, verses 18 through 20, I mentioned this to you last week. Paul says that the wrath of God is being revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth by their unrighteousness. For what may be known about God has been clearly seen through what has been made, so that men are without excuse. All right? What does Paul say? Paul says that what can be known about God, his invisible nature, his divine attributes can be clearly seen, that the earth in its intelligent design reflects the Creator. Psalm 19:1, the heavens declare the glory of God. What is the writer saying? As you read the rest of the psalm, he's basically saying when you look around, what has been created tells you something about its Creator. So this is the argument of design. Darwin in his Origin of Species. Of course, you know that he is the father of evolutionary theory. But Darwin, in his Origin of the Species, has a chapter, a little referenced chapter, chapter 6 of his book that he wrote on Origin of the Species. And the title of this chapter is this: Problems with My Theory. The chapter is titled Problems or Difficulties with My Theory. And this is what he writes: to suppose that the eye, the human eye, which is a marvelous machine, it is an unbelievable machine. To suppose that the eye, with all of its imitable contrivances for adjusting the focus to different distances, for admitting different amounts of light, and for the correction of spherical and chromatic aberrations, could have been formed by natural selection seems, I freely confess, absurd in the highest degree. That's what he says. I just don't know how you get eye. I can get hand, but I can't get eye. Do you understand? I'll give you another example. There is a bird that is only found in South America, in Ecuador, South America. It's called the swordbill hummingbird. It has a beak that is 5 inches long. The bird's body is only 5 inches long. It has a beak that is equal to the length of its body. Okay? Evolutionists for some time try to figure out what in the... Because everything you see on every animal, according to evolution, is intended. It was formed for some kind of reason. What's with that? To have enough energy to be able to fly and catch... to fly and to catch its dinner, it needs a generous amount of nectar. Okay? That's true of every hummingbird. And in the Andes Mountains, there is a flower that is unique to that region called the mistletoe flower that has its nectar 5 inches down in the flower. So you've got this bird and you've got this flower that go hand in hand that just fit perfectly together. Not in different areas of the world, but right there together. And you see this picture of God's creative design. If you want to watch a great movie, go and find it. We got it at Blockbuster. I don't even know if you can find it anymore. But if you ever have a chance to watch a little kind of documentary, it's called Expelled. Okay? Look up Expelled. Ben Stein is the narrator through Expelled. You know who Ben Stein is? Bueller. Bueller. You know who he is? He is great in this. It's kind of a series to expose or to reveal intelligent design. ID, intelligent design. And he is pro-intelligent design. He believes that the design of the universe points to an intelligent designer. That's what we're talking about here. And he talks and interviews academics that don't want to concede intelligent design and how they're pushed, when pushed against the wall, how they just don't have any answers. All they can do is throw up their hands and go, listen, it works most of the way, but we can't get all the way. And so here's what the scientific community says. So the gap that we can't bridge with science, what do you think we do? We take it in faith. I mean, that's what the scientific community has to do. The gaps that we can't fully bridge with scientific theory, we just take a leap of faith and believe that they can be connected. And you go, you know what? I take a leap of faith every day. The difference is that my leap of faith leads me to a better conclusion than yours does. Okay? This is the evidence of design. The third evidence or argument for the existence of God is called the anthropological argument. Okay? So anthropos is the Greek word for man or humanity. Here you've got the word logos in there because we talk about theologos, anthropologos, right? Everything we're studying has an ology at the end. It just means the word or the truth about something. And so anthropos is the Greek word for man. And the anthropological argument is what we would call the moral argument. Okay? The cosmological argument deals with cause. The teleological argument deals with design, or the final outcome, the final product of a thing, how it looks. The anthropological argument is the argument of morality. And the way the anthropological argument goes is this: every human being has innate, built, hardwired into themselves a sense of oughtness. Philosophers refer to this as a sense of oughtness, a moral compass that is refined and stretched the older they get, but it's there from the very beginning. Okay? It's the reason that you can have a 2-year-old, right, on their feet, and they can understand commands, and you can say, "Don't you do that, don't you pick that up," and they will look at you, "Don't you touch it." And you can sense it. You haven't spoken in a fearful tone. The child maybe doesn't receive a whole lot of discipline. They're not understanding cause and effect yet or whatever. But there is in them this innate sense that what they are doing is violating a law. They are violating a norm. You can see it built into the souls of human beings. And then, of course, as we move on, parents refine that and they build on that, and culture adds to that and shows what boundaries are. But it is hardwired in us as human beings. Well, for there to be a law in me, there must be a lawgiver. There must be a standard that is beyond me for which I feel accountable to that standard. Does everybody understand that? That's the only way I can feel guilt or shame, is I must have a perception of a higher standard that I'm violating right now. And when a child goes to pick up something and mom or dad says, "No, I don't want you to take that," the child is not just thinking I'm violating mom or dad's standards, even though mom or dad actually are representatives of God to that child at that point. But there is something deeper. There's something deeper that's going on in a child. And the scriptures actually speak to this. Okay, we talked about this. By the way, you'll notice that these three arguments, they fall very much in line with this whole idea of general revelation, right? How do we know that God exists? Or how does God reveal himself? Well, he reveals himself in the world. He reveals himself through providential actions. There's design. He reveals himself through human conscience, right? So these three arguments are fitting with our general revelation definition really well. And in the moral way, the scriptures talk about the fact that God has hardwired humanity with a sense of oughtness. It can be found in Romans chapter 2, verses 14 and 15. I mentioned this to you last week. I'll say it again to you. In Romans 2, Paul says, "And when Gentiles," and remember, when he says Gentiles, what he means are people who are not religious like we're religious. Okay? So you could say this: "And when the lawless ones," the ones who are just living for themselves, doing whatever they want, "and when Gentiles who do not have the law," that is the Jewish law, all baked in and codified, "and when Gentiles who do not have the law do instinctively the things required by the law, they prove that they have a law unto themselves, their consciences both affirming and even convicting them." What's Paul saying? Paul says, listen, even the pagans have a code, a basic moral code that they say, this far, no more. Or if you do cross that line, you're a bad person. I mean, it's just, you're a bad person. Well, I didn't break any laws in Arlington. Yeah, I know it's not on the law books, but you're still a bad person, okay? Because it's who we are. It's who we were designed to be. Now, some people will argue, all of that sense of moral oughtness is really formed by your culture. Okay, I've had this discussion with people before. You can't use the oughtness, the moral argument, because cultures set laws and set morality. Do you understand that? That's the reason you can find in some cultures, like you can go to the Autobahn and drive 150 miles an hour if you want to. But in Arlington, you can only drive 40. So clearly the different place, different culture, different speeds, different laws, right? Makes sense. Well, it is true that a lot of the laws and a lot of the ways that we express the fundamental core laws can look different ways in different cultures. And even different cultures can abandon the law of God and call something good that God considered evil, okay? Abortion, right? Even though our culture, for our country for a very long time, gave permission for abortion, doesn't mean that in God's law it was actually right. Does it make sense? So culture is not the defining determination of what is right. And there are a fundamental set of principles that are transcultural. They are true in every single culture. It doesn't matter where you go. No matter what culture, at any time, okay, any time in the history of the world, any culture around the world, to go to another person's property and take something that does not belong to you is considered wrong. It's wrong. Now, once again, the law may say, except unless you're the king, and then you're the king, you can take whatever you want. But that's an exception. That's not a kingdom-wide law. Does it make sense? So there are some fundamental laws that are baked into our hearts regarding authority, regarding human life, regarding honesty. There are some fundamental things that are a part of our core, and those things have to come from a lawgiver that's higher than the United States or the UN or anything else for that matter. Okay? This is what C.S. Lewis says. If no set of moral ideas were truer or better than any other, okay? Listen to what he's just saying. He says, if the Germans decide you can kill people and the Americans say you can't, and you look at everybody and goes, well, it just depends on where you live. The Germans were right. The Americans were right. Right? Morality is all relative to wherever you live and wherever you grew up. That's what people will say. Right? All depends on the culture. All depends on the time in which you lived. So those people that were killing people for absolutely no reason in the 16th century, well, you can't really say that was wrong because it was right for them and it's a different place and time. You go, no. There's a fundamental principle. I don't care what time you live in and what place you live in. It's wrong. Okay? That's what C.S. Lewis is talking about here. If no set of moral ideas were truer or better than any other, then there would be no sense of preferring civilized morality to savage morality, or Christian morality to Nazi morality. The moment you say that one lot of morals is better than another, you are in fact measuring them by an ultimate standard. You understand? The moment you say the Nazis were wrong, then you're either only making that statement because you're American, let's just say, or Christian, right? Or actually the non-Christians who say the Nazis were wrong are obviously not using a Christian standard, right? And the Muslims that say the Nazis were wrong are not using an American or a Christian. Do you understand? They're using a standard that's beyond their own religion, beyond their own culture, beyond their own nation. They're using a standard that's much higher up. And this moral reality must come from a being, from a standard bearer that is moral and higher up. This is the moral argument for the existence of God. So you have a argument of first cause. World can't just come into being. Okay? It has to have a first and ultimate cause. Number two, the world communicates, reflects incredible sophistication and design and operation and complexity. It's that it could just come into being. I think I remember, and I'm going to get this illustration wrong, but someone once said, if you gave 1,000 monkeys, to believe that the world just came into being is believing that you could give 1,000 monkeys 1,000 typewriters, and inside of just a couple of weeks they could write. One of them could create War and Peace. No, really. I mean, they could just, by random chance, you could get one of them that could produce War and Peace. They said that's the likelihood that randomization could produce the complexity and the beauty that we see in the world that we live in. And then you have the moral argument that we all are moral beings. Even the most sadistic, evil, vile person has some moral standard, something that they say this ought to be this way, which proves that there is a lawgiver that's higher up. Okay, so when you hear these three evidences or arguments for the existence of God, which of these is most compelling to you? Which resonates in your soul? Because you know, some of these are more compelling to me than others. What is it that you find most helpful for you? Yes?
The teleological argument.
Okay.
If you look at like a flower or a newborn baby, I mean, how can you think that there's nothing random there?
Yeah, there's incredible complexity. Of course, the evolutionists would say, well, evolutionary time has produced this over time. But good, honorable scientists have also said there are gaps in the evolutionary cycle in which things were formed so quickly that they would have not had time to adapt. So how do you explain that? How did those come to be? They seem to have a sense of purpose. What else? What others of these, or maybe the same one for a different reason? Which of these is most compelling to you?
I like the cosmological. I mean, everything is in order.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah. Are you talking more the teleological in terms of design or first cause?
the first cause.
Okay.
And that cause is complete.
Yeah.
It's like you said, it's finished.
Yeah.
And it's working. It doesn't need adjustments.
You're right. Okay. Okay. What others? Others of you, let's converse about this here just for a few minutes. Maybe you find something not so convincing. Maybe you go, still not sure.
From the convincing standpoint, I'd say the teleological too. From a medical standpoint, if everything were random, when we studied the human body and came up with cures for things and things like that, if everybody's things were random, it would be very difficult to come up with the cause of this and then a solution to that.
Yeah. So a disease over here, a disease we treat, and this is not a political statement, we treat COVID in the United States the same way we treat it in China. Right? Got people separated on the other side of the globe, and lo and behold, wow, their bodies work like our bodies work. So we can count on those things. We can anticipate that the X is going to produce Y.
Yeah.
Good.
I think the teleological argument is the weakest of the three arguments.
Okay, and why is that?
A couple of people here. I think if we look at the end result, right? This is the design what we observe in the world today. Well, the world is the way it is today due to the course of perhaps evolution taking its toll. So. The hummingbird that you mentioned, if that hummingbird lived in the Sahara Desert, it would be dead. We wouldn't have any evidence of it. But that hummingbird lives really close to the flower that can sustain it. That makes a logical sense from a creationist standpoint, but also from. So when I look at the three arguments, that's the weakest.
Yeah.
The strongest argument to me, and I'm just maybe an analytical thinker, the cosmological argument, you have to go back to a certain time. And regardless of who you are and what you believe, there is an element of unknown and there's an element of forced faith, regardless of what you're going to be doing, if you actually stand for anything. And if that's the case, making the jump to something that has a first cause, a creator, makes a lot more sense than the alternative.
Yeah, that's good. I think that's very well explained. I want to come back to that in just a minute. Who else would like to dialogue with this? By the way, we can, as long as there's no physical violence, you're welcome to argue in here a little bit. Yes?
So, whenever I first started coming to CBC, I wasn't a believer, but my wife, who I was dating at the time, started bringing me here, and I had all these questions about like, why is the Bible authoritative? And then one of the other things I started reading was C.S. Lewis.
Yeah.
And so when I read this moral relativity theory, I started to question myself because, of course, I understood that if I were to kill someone, I would feel wrongly about that.
Yeah.
And I think every human would,
Yeah.
except for certain ones. But it made me question, where did that innate instinct come from?
Good.
And I don't think that's something I ever decided for myself.
Yeah.
And I thought that probably comes from something else.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. I appreciate that. Yeah, relativism doesn't really work. You hear people, relativism has become quite in vogue in the last, I don't know, 20, 30 years or so. It's become quite in vogue that it seems really great that we've mixed relativism up with opinions and preferences. I cannot say to Craig can say, I love beets. I can't say you're wrong.
He'd be wrong.
And all of God's people said amen. Yeah. So, but I can't say you're wrong. I can say, I don't like beets. Oh, so David, you have a preference, just like Craig has a preference, and those preferences are on the other side of the room. Oh, okay. So what happens is we begin to take truths and do the same thing with them, right? I have my own preferences. We would all agree that's fair. I have my own truths. And that's where relativism comes in. It comes in out of a sense of, number one, independence. I think the higher up, God, I want to be my own God, okay? But at least independence. I'm free to think however I want. Combined with a little bit of this idea of wanting to have my own, I want to be unique. I want to be unique. So I have my own truth and you have your own truth, and that's all great. And so relativism sounds very sexy. It's very cool. We're all relativists, right? You have your truth, I have my truth. Relativism does not work in real life, and I can prove it. I can prove it doesn't work. If I'm driving home and I get to the stoplight over here at Green Oaks or Meadowbrook and Green Oaks East Chase here, if the light is green, I expect there to be no other relativists coming the opposite direction, right? I don't want anyone that's coming across perpendicular in my path to think that their red light means go, right? If they say red means go to me, we got a problem. We have a problem. That doesn't work in real life. So relativism is this false idea of preserving my own belief system without having to actually be accountable to it. Does that make sense? And the anthropological argument says that there is, as Ryan said, there is baked into us a fundamental set of rules. Now, not every rule that I follow in my life was baked in there from inception by God. I had to learn stuff by taking a driver's test. I had to be taught things by my parents and teachers. Some of that morality was formed and shaped and matured, but there was a fundamental set that was there that's true in you, and you, and you, and you, and it's fundamental all the way across the board. Anybody else want to comment to these three evidences or arguments? Okay, I tend to be right on the same page with you. I think the design, even though I was a graphic designer, I love design. I think the design argument is intriguing, but I think it can be easily challenged and pushed back against, so that you find yourself just kind of push and pull, push and pull, push and pull, and not really getting anywhere. I think the cosmological argument, because it is so scientific, is the greatest argument. We know that nothing just happens. It's got to have a first cause somewhere. And it also frees me up in the whole scheme of what Christians believe around the world to give flexibility. If I've got a good friend who says, listen, I believe Jesus Christ, Son of God, died for the sins of the world, put my faith in him, I believe that there is we're brother and sister. I also happen to believe in the Big Bang. I go, well, that's great. Who do you think created the bang? God did. Good. Let's go have lunch. I mean, we can have a clever conversation about that, and convincing and push and pull and everything. But I don't split faith over somebody who says that they hold to a old Earth theory with the Big Bang. That's fine. You gonna say something, Susie?
With the cosmological, you can say God created all, but a lot of people say God's dead. It's obvious the world is falling apart, so God must be dead.
Well, and to which I would argue, it's that the world has been falling apart since it was created. It started falling. It only got 2 chapters into this whole thing before it started falling apart. The thing about providence, though, and this is the whole general revelation, the thing about providence is that remarkably good things happen in a bad world. And you've got to explain why things that don't just follow the scientific method down the toilet, why sometimes there are incredible things that seem to suspend logic and suspend a world that is broken. And you've got to give answer to that. That's the whole issue of providence. Okay, so I've just very briefly given you 3 arguments or discussions about that God is. That's all we've done. All we've done at this point is determine there is a God. That's it. We haven't even described what he must be like, or she must be like, or it must be like, right? All we've done is decided and concluded there is a God. Now we have to begin to unpack what is this God like. And this is where Acts 17, 24 through 31 is helpful for me. In fact, you might open your Bibles to Acts 17, 24 through 31. This, I think, is a passage, it's a great passage for parents or grandparents to sit with their kids or grandkids and just talk about God, what God is like. This passage is the beginning of Paul's sermon on Mars Hill. He's in Athens. So just to put this in context for where we are in the book of 1 Thessalonians, remember Paul goes from Philippi, he goes to Thessalonica. He's chased out of Thessalonica, so he goes to Berea. The terrible Thessalonians follow him to Berea. They stir up dust for him, so he has to leave Berea. He heads all the way down to Athens, okay? And he is now in Athens, and he finds these temples, these pagan temples and altars all over Athens. And so Paul is about to have a sermon that he preaches in the midst of this rampant paganism all around. And in Acts chapter 17, verse 24, he says, "The God who made the world and everything in it is Lord of heaven and earth, and does not dwell in temples made by human hands, and is not served by human hands as if he needed anything. For he himself gives life and breath and all things to all men. From one man he made every nation of men, and he determined the times and the seasons for them in the exact places where they should live. God did this so that men might reach out and find him, though he is not far from any one of us." And he goes on a little further. So he gives in this little sermon so much about God. I mean, he just speaks about so many things about God. So here's what I'd like you to do. I'd like you to just take time around your table, okay? And I'd like you to just identify as many things about God that you can discover in that little sermonette from Paul, okay? And you just fill in the blank. God is blank. God is blank. Just have a discussion, okay? I don't want you to just do it by yourself. I want you to have a discussion around your table on this text. And then we'll come back together here in just a second. Yeah, go through 31. I only went through like verse 27, but go ahead and go down to 31, okay? I'm going to give you about 3 more minutes, okay?
Sorry. It could. It's the rest of the day.
My ultimate song to put a venue song is the
He was intentional. Determined their appointed time. That is intention. Everything is not without reason.
first of all, some of your own poets have said we are second part of some of your own poets have said we are his offspring. I wonder what the
Okay, let's pull it back together. This was a very quick study of this text, but hopefully you gleaned a lot of fruit from this text. So let's just kind of walk through it, sort of verse by verse, and just see what you discovered about God from this text. Says, the God who made the world and everything in it is Lord of heaven and earth. What do you learn about God?
Creator.
Okay, God who made the world, everything in it. Anything else? He's supreme. He's sovereign. Okay, so we see the creativeness of God. Okay, we could also argue the power of God, right? The sovereignty of God. God made it. He owns it. He can do with it what he wants, right? If your sibling makes something at summer camp, they have permission to break it. You don't have permission to break it, right? But they do. It's theirs. So that's what sovereignty is. So the God who made the world and everything in it is Lord of heaven and earth. And he does not live in temples built by hands. Omnipresence. He's spirit. Does not live. He's spirit. And he's omnipresent. He's present everywhere. Okay? Does not dwell in temples made by human hands. He is not served by human hands as if he needed anything.
Self-sufficient.
Self-sufficient. The theological term is aseity. Okay? The aseity of God, the self-sufficiency of God. He doesn't need anything. If you ever start a sentence with, well, you know, God needs, stop. Whatever comes next is heresy. Really. Okay? Funerals are places where people have terrible theology. It's okay that grandma went. God needed another angel. False on 2 accounts. God doesn't need an angel and people don't become angels. So stop it. Okay? Now that's not the time you want to correct people, is at a funeral.
I was about to say, I would love to see that
All right?
correction happen.
But just think about that. Think of how sweet and so off course that statement is. You understand? God needed, no. God wasn't going, boy, I wish I could get another one of them up here. You know, I'd feel so much better about myself if I could just get some more people up here. All right? He is self-sufficient. He's not served by human hands as if he needed anything, because he himself gives all men life and breath and everything else. Giving. He's a giving God. He's a gracious God. Okay? Omnipotent, yep. And you'll see some of these things kind of come up several times.
It's also personal. There's personal pronouns.
Ah, good for you. He's a personal God. And by the way, overarching, big, he's a living God. He does things. Because what are we going to find later in the text? Well, what are we going to find later about what is not God? They're idols of stone and wood, and they can't, good thing they do. You guys have crafted this statue, and you bow down to this statue. Our God's a living God. He's actually alive. He can show up and leave and talk and make, and he can do all these things. So good call on that, personal and living. All right? From one man he made every nation of men that they should inhabit the whole earth. Anything there?
It's an intentional.
Yeah, good. He's got purpose. He has purpose. And he determined the times set for them and the exact places where they should live.
Out of order.
Okay, God of order. Very good. Okay, so we see the orderliness of God and the timelessness of God, because he does this for all men. He didn't do it just for one generation, right? I mean, isn't this fascinating how much you just kind of peeling back the onion? This is who our God is. By the way, I love that verse. He determined the times and the seasons for you and the exact places where you should live. He does it so men might reach out and find him, though he's not far from any one of you. You live in the apartment or the house that you live in right now by God's divine decree. Think about that. You live where you live because God decided you'd live there. That means God has a purpose for you in your neighborhood and in your apartment complex, because he determined the times and the seasons for you and the exact places where you should live. Whoa.
He's ordained.
Huh?
He's ordained.
He's ordained that. He's providential.
Time and history
Yeah. Isn't that amazing?
from the beginning.
Yeah. You know, when we read about the coming of Christ 3 times in the scriptures, it says, and when the time had fully come, at just the right time, when the times had reached their fulfillment. 3 times in scriptures it says that God sent his son Jesus. So that means that Jesus didn't come a minute too early or a minute too late. He came at just the perfect time. I think that's a picture of the fulfillment of this text in Acts chapter 17. God determined the times and the seasons and the exact places where Jesus should live. Okay? God did this so that men would seek him and perhaps reach out for him and find him, though he's not far from any one of us.
Relational.
He's a relational God. Excellent. Okay? And he is an approachable God. And he is a findable God. For in him we live and move and have our being. In him we live and move and have our being. He's life. Are we talking about? Let me see. Somebody got your schedule here. You got the front end of your schedule. Are we? Yeah. Let me just see something here real quick. Okay, we are not talking about providence. So let me just give you a quick primer on providence. Okay, this won't cost you any extra for the course. But providence. We speak about providence, the providence of God. We speak about several parts of providence. Providence starts with creation. God makes. Okay? And then we speak about sustenance. I use different words, but just for our purpose here. Sustenance means everything that God makes, he holds together. Think about that, right? In him all things hold together, it says about Jesus in Colossians 1. So he makes it, but whatever he makes, he holds it together. So God made this marker, but he's also sustaining this marker. If God died right now, this marker would cease to be. He holds the marker together. Do you understand? Okay. Thirdly is what we would call
Orchestration.
Orchestration, thank you. Everything that God creates and He sustains, He orchestrates to accomplish His purposes. That's where we get providence when we often use the word providence. Oh, that was providential. That means God was directing it to accomplish His purposes. Does it make sense? So whatever He makes, He sustains. Whatever He sustains, He orchestrates that. What's the fourth one?
Governance.
Governance.
Can you tell I took this class before?
Huh?
Can you tell I took this class before?
Yeah. So governance means that even the things that appear to be out of line with God, He is able to bring all of those things to accomplish His ultimate and final purposes. So when we talk about a God who made the world and everything in it, is Lord of heaven and earth, does not dwell, as it says, and in Him we live and move and have our being. In Him we live, creation, and move and have our being. He is sustaining us. And then he will talk a little bit later about God's purposing what He sustains to accomplish His purposes. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. That's the fullness of providence. Providence is not just that things happen sometimes for good reason, but that God is behind and is weaving together all of history and life and accidents and cancer and tsunamis, and He is just bringing it together. And God is not going, oh, I didn't mean that to happen. What am I going to do now? If life gives you lemons, let's make lemonade. That's not what God's doing. God in His sovereignty is just, He's an orchestra. He's a conductor bringing the pieces together. Okay? I'm sorry?
Can I ask a quick question?
Yes.
So, to that end, and I know the book addressed it a little bit, perhaps you can flesh out a little bit more about God being sorry that He did certain things, and perhaps expressing remorse. And I know the book talked about that, but might you come
Yeah. Yeah, I think sometimes we get into some of the emotions of God that express a couple of things going on. Number one, expressing an anthropomorphic aspect of God, which is a human quality given to God, but is not, it's actually called anthropopathism. Anthropomorphism is giving human physical characteristics to God. God has hands, God has lips. No, He doesn't. He's a spirit. Okay? Jesus has hands, Jesus has lips, but God the Father is spirit. Okay? But the scriptures speak about the hand of God and the eyes of God searching to and fro. So that's the authors using, inspired by God, but using human characteristics for the divine. I think the same thing happens with anthropopathism, which is giving human emotions to God. And God inspires the scriptures to communicate divine disappointment in what has taken place without any violation of His providential and sovereign oversight of creation. Does it make sense? Mm-hmm. It's not like God says, oops, but the closest human emotion that we could put in a text like that is regret or sadness for what has happened without any violation of sovereignty and His providential plan. Does it make sense? Okay, let's keep moving on this text, and then we're going to do another exercise. Therefore, we are God's offspring. We should not think the divine being is like gold or silver or stone, an image made by man's design and skill. I'm sorry? Abba, okay, yeah. So the personal aspect of the fatherliness of God. Anything else?
And it's living.
He's living. Very good, very good. He is self-existent. Okay, which is a little different than self-sufficient. Self-sufficient means that which is doesn't need anything to continue to be, but self-existent means nothing created me. I am the beginning, the Alpha, and the Omega, right? Okay? In the past, God overlooked such ignorance, but now He commands all people everywhere to repent, for He set a time when He will judge the world with justice. By the man He has appointed, He has given proof to all men by raising Him from the dead. Anything else you see in there?
He was merciful. Well, He is merciful.
Merciful? He's patient, but He's also judge, right? He's judge. Some people have, and we'll talk about this in just a second, some people have this notion that God is so loving He can't be just or can't be wrathful.
Can't be just if He's not.
Right? But that's also, let's take two aspects of God. Transcendence of God, right? That's transcendence. That's the way that's the definition of transcendence. Okay? Transcendence of God, but we'd also say the immanence of God, right? He's near. He's near. And so you go, well, those cancel each other out, don't they? You can't both be transcendent and immanent. What? Yeah, you can. So you can also be wrathful and loving. Right? Can you as a parent be wrathful and loving? Yep. Yep. So I did that tonight. But yeah, so it's the fullness of the character of God. So I wanted this passage to be a bit of an exercise for us to just kind of get our minds turning on the grandness of the character of God. Okay, we're going to blow things up even a little bit more here for just a minute. So let's talk about the attributes of God. We speak about the attributes of God. And historically, people have tried to catalog the attributes of God using several categories. Okay? Some people have used the categories of the metaphysical versus the moral. Okay? The metaphysical, that's just a fancy way of saying his stuff, his being, his stuff. So under metaphysical, we would put things like transcendence, immanent, living, personal, self-sufficient, that which constitutes God's being or existence. Under moral, we would put kind of virtues, holy, just, wrathful. Do you understand? And people have used those two categories to say, oh, when you think about God, and again, these are just human categories to help us think better. They're not scriptural. They're just ways to think about God. Metaphysical, moral. Other people, this has been the most common, have used the categories of communicable versus incommunicable attributes. Okay, if you have a communicable disease, it means it can pass from you to another person. And so what people with this kind of catalog do is say there are some attributes of God that will communicate to human beings, and there are other attributes of God that will not communicate to human beings. So God's self-sufficiency is an incommunicable attribute. Do you understand? Because none of us are self-sufficient, no matter what your teenager acts like. Okay? Love, however, is a communicable attribute. Love is true of God, and He communicates to us to be loving. Does that make sense? All-powerful, omnipotence, is an incommunicable attribute. You understand? God doesn't make us all-powerful. So some people classically in theological history have used those two categories. I want to suggest a category I learned in seminary that I think is brilliant and will help you throughout the rest of your theological construct. All right? And it is to look at the attributes of God with 6 categories. 6 categories. By the way, the more buckets you create, the easier it is to put things in buckets, right? If I said, I want you to think about Central Bible Church and put everything you find and see in Central Bible Church in only one of 2 buckets. Like, how do you even sort all of that, right? But if I said we're going to create 10 buckets, and one bucket's going to be soft things, another bucket's going to be sharp things, another, then you can start, I can decide if this sharp, is this more sharp or more soft? That more buckets makes it a little easier. So I want to give you 6 buckets to think about the attributes of God. And you'll hear past core people talk about I rev me. Okay? And when they do that, you think they're speaking in tongues. They're not. Okay? 6 categories for the character of God, or the attributes of God. The first is intellectual. The next is relational. The next one is ethical. The next is volitional. The next is metaphysical. And the final one is emotional. Okay. Intellectual deals with God's mind. How He thinks, how He reasons, that sort of thing. Relational, how God relates. How He relates with Himself and how He relates with the world. Ethical, God's morality. Anything that you put under morality. Volitional, what God can do or not do. okay, is functionality. Metaphysical, what God is. What is his stuff? What's he made out of? And finally, emotional, God's passions. We often refer to them as God's passions. Make sense? Okay. So here's what I'd like you to do. I'd like you to take the next 10 minutes around your table. And in fact, let's divide this up a little bit because we won't have time for you to do all of these. So let's just do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And I'm going to assign numbers to you to table, all right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2. Okay? And I'd like you to just fill up your category with as many attributes of God as you can possibly imagine in that category. Now so you won't be frustrated, some attributes are going to feel like they can go in a couple different categories. Okay? So, and again, this is a human invention. So there's no right or wrong. I mean, I'll rebuke you if you get something really terribly wrong. But that's beside the point. You'll still be members. So try to put as many attributes of God, okay? And you got to brainstorm. If you only get 1 or 2, you have to leave the class. All right? So fill up your category with as many attributes. Go. You got 10 minutes. Okay, I'm about to erase these and I'm going to put them in a different form on the board, but as long as you know what number you're working on.
Sinless.
I'm an engineer. I'm sorry.
Is that an ethical? That's more emotional, I think. Ethical is right, wrong, moral, just, pure, innocent, sinless, righteous. Did you go to the thesaurus?
No, I'm just,
Yes.
that's why I'm looking at this going,
Yeah. I think so. Fair. Actually, kind of unfair when you get done. We were and when I say that, I mean unfair that he didn't have to save any of us. He's good. He's good.
long suffering.
Is that morality though, or is that emotional?
I don't know, I'm trying to,
Oh, sorry.
it's one of those attributes I remember.
Yeah.
We said he was just.
Yes.
Just pure, honest, and righteous, holy, and just. Truthful.
with grace. It's more of a relational. Faithful as morality. Isn't that more? Loyal? Yeah. See, it crossed over. Yeah.
Of course, it's on social media.
Yeah.
Isn't that well, he was
It's also unwavering. Not changing. Oh yeah. Yeah, so unchanging. When you're thinking of relative, right?
Okay, I'm going to give you just a couple more minutes on this. Good to know.
Good, right, true, noble, honorable, admirable, excellent. It's the one more new one. But yes,
We already have some.
yeah, Philippians 4:8 is my favorite. All day long. We all, yeah, and it's multiple places in the Bible.
It's one mindset. You're trying to get that real life mindset. So hard.
Yeah.
Over and over and over and over and over. Anytime I start talking, nope.
Well, and I tell the kids, if you can't, it's not limits, it doesn't have to meet all those. If you can go crazy, thinking back to something good.
Okay, let's pull it back together. I know that's a brief time. Forgive me for that, but we got to cover a little bit of ground here before we're finished this evening. So, let me tell you why this exercise is good. It's good in several ways. First of all, it causes us to think about God. That's the main benefit. But a second benefit is that it causes us to think about how we define words. Do you know what I mean by that? When you say a word and somebody says, oh, that doesn't go in that category, that goes in another category, and then you realize that the way you've been thinking, and it may go in both, but the way you primarily think about mercy is in a relational aspect and not in a some other aspect, which is very interesting to really kind of reveal the way, because these are attributes of God, and so if you're thinking about an attribute of God simply in you might be thinking about it in a dimension that's not entirely accurate. So I overheard this table, and you were saying one of the attributes was grace, and then somebody said, well, it's generosity, and you're like, and then somebody said, yeah, and another one is generosity, and you say, well, generosity is grace, and you go, well, no, actually, grace is, are you looking at grace as the amount that's given, or the fact that it's freely given? Because both relate to grace. You understand? And so it really forces us to take our words and to better understand them. Because I think as Christians, we just toss about providence. Oh, that was providential. And you go, whoa, let's back up and think about what is providence? I mean, you start to lay that out on the table. That's unbelievable what's going on. You think it's just a parking place. This is fascinating what's going on behind the scenes. Does it make sense? So it helps us to understand God, and it helps us to understand the words. And I also think it helps us to understand the kinds of things we most gravitate to when we think about God. You tell people, give me 5 characteristics of God. Bam, 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 bam. Give me 10. Bam, 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 bam. Give me 30. I'm lost. Give me 50. You're like, whoa. Which I think tells us we got a pretty small view of God, present company included. We have our picture is a much more portable, condensed view of God, and probably a few attributes that have been meaningful for us in our life, and there are other attributes that we go, I didn't even know that was an attribute. I don't even know where that word came from. Make sense? Okay, so let's do a little theology here. Let's start with intellectual, and we're going to move pretty quick, okay, because sake of time here. Intellectual, give me 5, and I think might have 1 or 2 other tables that might have some too. So give me 5.
Righteous judgment.
Is that 2?
Yes, two. Immutable. Purposeful. Covenant keeping. Reasonable.
Okay, stop there. Okay, so see, interesting. You put holy here on an intellectual. I bet you some people might have put that under ethical. Okay, right? Sorry, they stole yours. Too bad. Okay, who else was a number 1? Table number 1. Yes. Got any others that you don't see up here?
Yeah, wise,
Okay.
complex, creative.
Okay. Taylor, I want to stop you there just for a second, just so I can make sure that this last table might have something to throw out. Wasn't there another number 1?
Yes.
Another number 1. Throw out.
All-knowing.
Okay, so omniscient. What else?
Intentional.
Okay, which might sound a whole lot like purposeful,
Oh.
right? Well, but I think it maybe is a little different.
Can't read your writing.
Sorry. Get used to it. I could have been a doctor. What else? Huh? Orderly. Okay. Welcome to the rest of your semester. What else? Okay, which is immutable. Immutable is unchanging. Anything else?
His ways are higher. His thoughts are higher.
Okay, thoughts are higher. Okay, good. So you could say it's a little bit like wise here. Yeah. Okay. Any of the other table ones that have something that wasn't put on this list? What do you got? Anything else?
Absolute truth.
Okay, so you could put truthful. Okay, which might come under ethical as well. All right. Let's move to relational. Okay, relational table back here, number 2. Give me 3.
We're 3.
We're
Huh?
2.
I'm sorry, you're 2. I'm sorry.
Omnipresent.
Okay.
Loving. Approachable.
Okay, loving, approachable.
Disciplines. Healing.
Okay, hold on just a second. Would you say?
Disciplines.
Okay, what do you mean by that? And the reason I'm asking you that, because you'll find this true all the way through the room, is that sometimes we use words and you're asking, okay, is that what God does, or is this who God is? And sometimes we have to make distinction. Okay, He does what He is, but when you say disciplines, that sounds like a noun.
Disciplinary.
Okay, He disciplines meaning as in judgment or holds accountable or something. Oh, gotcha. Okay, so He disciplines. Okay, there's another. That's terrible. There's another number 2. Phil's going to have to edit this video. There's another table 2. Another table 2. Where are you? Okay, give me 3. Quickly.
Personal, loving,
Okay.
kind.
Got loving here, kind.
Patient, forgiving, generous.
Okay, that's enough. 'Cause I think we've got another table 2. Did they leave you any scraps?
Faithful.
Huh?
Faithful.
Faithful. Good. Okay. What else?
Jealous.
Oh, good for you. Oh. It's like you just want to shut up and go home, right? What else? Anything else?
Fatherly.
Okay, good. We come over here. Okay, anything else?
Well, then we also talked about how relating to himself, so Trinitarian.
Oh, good for you. Trinity. She was that smart before she came out. Okay, but yeah, so let's don't forget the Trinity is an aspect, it tells us about God's relational aspect, okay? Anything else on table 2s that we missed?
Comforter.
Teacher.
Teacher, okay, and what did you say?
Comforter.
Okay, comforter.
Protector.
Okay, we're starting, so instead of he is comfort, let's take that off. God, here's the thing. I want us to make just distinction between the reason God comforts, which is his action, is because he's fatherly. Do you understand? So the reason that he protects is because he loves. All right? So protector is not his attribute. It might be his name. It might be what he does. But there's a lot of things God does that are just the overflow of his attributes. Do you understand the slight difference? Just a slight difference in that.
Wouldn't that be the same for forgiving and faithful?
Well, no, you could say God is faithful to his covenant.
Okay.
He is going to fulfill his covenant. He's faithful. He stays the course. He's going to do what he said he's going to do. You know what I'm saying? But forgiving is, interesting, he's faithful to do all of his attributes. God is faithful to judge. That means he's going to do what he said he's going to do. Makes sense? So he's faithful to forgive, but he's also faithful to
What
judge.
about a pursuer?
Okay, again, that's not an attribute as much as it is something God is doing. And again, I'm splitting hairs a little bit because if you start to add all the actions of God into all of this and the names of God, like God is called Abba, but Abba is not an attribute. God is a God of all comfort. Okay, he isn't. So, we could spend a lot of times and debate all of these, but I'm trying to keep your list slightly simple. Okay.
Is that where intentional would go?
What's that?
Intentional?
Yeah, somebody mentioned intentional up here. So yeah, you could say, and this is where we get into how are we defining our words? Okay. Do you look at intentionality as an intellectual aspect of God? I don't. I would think intentional is more relational or maybe even volitional, what God chooses to do. Does it make sense? And I'm not going to, this is not about me saying you've put something in the wrong category because all the categories are just human accommodations. Does it make sense? But I'd encourage you can write down all these things, but you may want to reshuffle the deck a little bit. Do you understand? And put these things, because they're categories to help you remember the fullness of who God is. Okay? All right. Because all of these are great. I may just put them in other categories. Okay? Ethical.
He's good.
Okay? He's good.
He's great.
He's what?
Great.
Okay. Yeah, well, goodness is, great. Yeah, we can talk about differences. But what else? He's righteous.
Holy.
Something else.
Give me one more.
Truthful.
Truthful. Okay, the other table 3.
Sinless, spotless, clean.
Okay, we're starting to get into synonyms of kind of the same thing. Okay, but that's okay. Spotless, clean,
Some of our good ones.
tidy.
I know what he's doing when we get home. He's gonna clean something.
All right. What else? What else?
Just.
Give me a couple more.
Just.
Oh, just good.
Merciful,
Okay.
unchanging,
Okay, that's immutable. We had over the other one, but we'll go ahead and put it here too.
Loyal.
Anything else? Loyal. Okay. And we might call that faithful.
Faithful.
Yeah, that's, again, it's even some of the terms we use several different kinds of terms. How about the other? We had the other table 3. Did any of them miss? Any of them that are just grossly missed?
Honest?
Okay. Honest is true. Whole idea of true. Okay, let's move on to number 4, volitional. Okay. Table 4.
So we broke up into 2 separate buckets of can do or can't do.
Okay.
So these are a little bit more verb oriented.
Okay.
But so what he can do is he can forgive, he can create, inspire.
Okay, can we all admit he can do all of this?
Yeah.
I mean, reality is we would have a pretty long list of all the things God can do. So I don't want to poo-poo on your categories, but those might be hard categories to really think about, because everything I think of God can do, he can be kind, he can be patient, he can be forgiving, he can be, you know what I'm saying? So
There are certain things that he can't. So when
Okay.
you think about being against his own nature,
okay, so God cannot contradict himself.
Right.
and therefore he cannot sin.
Yep, good.
I think Caleb, you had a really good one. Or,
He can't cease to exist.
Good.
Can't break his own promise or covenant?
Okay, and once again, we'll start to get up into here. He cannot not be wise. He cannot, that sort of thing. Okay, I do think, by the way, this and metaphysical are the hardest categories to try to wrap your hands around a little bit. How about the other table 4?
We also went things he can't do. He cannot learn because he already knows.
Okay. And once again, that's because he's all wise. But yeah, anything else?
Cannot forget.
Okay, cannot forget.
Can't change.
Okay, and then we've got immutable up there.
what is salvation? Is that anything to do with saving, the power to will this can do?
Yeah, and that's it's kind of a little bit of omnipotence and relational kind of mixed in together. Let me give you a couple of other to put in the volitional category. Okay, sovereignty. God is sovereign. Sovereign is his volition. He has charge over all things. God is free. Okay, that's a great attribute of God that we don't often think about, but he is free. He is not bound or obligated to anything other than his nature. Okay, and this is kind of what you are saying here. You're drawing a picture here of the freedom of God. This is where you could put he is providential. Now, let me just tell you that providence is the outworking of sovereignty. Okay, so providence and sovereignty are hand in glove together. When we say, oh, that was providential, what we're saying is the sovereign God made that happen.
Right.
Makes sense? So, but we could say he's providential. I would tend to say purposeful over here. Purposeful and intentional over here in terms of the volition. Those would be my categories. Okay? All right, let's talk about metaphysical. We've only got a few minutes. Y'all bear with me here. Metaphysical.
Eternal.
Okay, eternal, good. Spit them out.
Omniscient.
Okay,
Self-existent.
okay. That's the aseity. What else? Okay, I'll stop you there. Let's go to the other table because we may only have a few. Okay, good. Infinite. You say just there. Okay, some people might put it over on ethical. What else?
Spirit.
Spirit. Very good. You ask, what is God? Metaphysically, what is God? God's spirit. That's what he is.
Holy.
Okay? Again, you got to decide we're going to put holy under metaphysical. You can put holy under ethical, right? You're trying to.
Well, it depends on the holy, like the set apart.
Yeah, if you speak about God being set apart, yeah. I might put immutable under this category as opposed to any of the other categories. Immutable, the unchangingness of God, feels more about kind of his substance, his whole being, as opposed to a particular aspect of that being. Once again, this is my category. You guys can put it wherever you want to put it.
Does light fit?
Okay, so when the scriptures speak about God as light, it's really you might say glorious. You might say beautiful. Light is more of a description of God's glory, God's beauty, God's creativity, the fullness of his attributes. Okay, so it's a metaphor used in Scripture that speaks of that. But God is not light. God's actually greater than light. Make sense? Okay, last one, emotional. What would we say? Table?
Jealous.
Yep.
Okay, jealous? Keep going.
Merciful.
Okay. What else?
Can have wrath and anger.
Wrath. Thank you. Go,
You guys
whoa,
are-
whoa, 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 man. We're having so much fun until you put wrath in there. Wrath is an attribute and an action of God, right?
Yep.
Okay. What was the other one? You said anger. Yeah, yes, righteous anger. These are what we call the passions of God. Okay. The other table that had this.
Worshipful,
Okay. What do you mean by that?
worthy of worship.
Okay. So he is. Yeah, because worshipful seems to be something that God does, but
Yeah.
you're saying he is maybe worthy.
Inspiring.
Okay. Keep going. Passionate. Okay.
Is honorable, would that fit in that?
How would you define honorable? Are you at this table? Are you helping them out?
Cracking the whip.
What are you doing here?
In your leg.
They took all of our other words.
Anything else? Yeah, they took all the best words. Okay. Merciful. Yeah, we got merciful up there. Merciful. Got added you in there. Yeah, all the aspects of love, because we're talking about God's emotion, his passion. He's joyful. God is joyful. We could,
Suffering.
yeah, long suffering or patient. Somebody put patient over there, but we do the same thing here.
Sorrow.
Where does omnipotence come?
Metaphysical.
Yeah, probably metaphysical up here. Omniscient, omnipotent.
Yeah.
Okay, y'all get the idea. You get the idea, right? Now, let me just say a few things. I'm going to keep you a couple minutes late, okay? Let me just say a couple of things about these attributes. What is God? God is the sum total of his attributes. God is the sum total of his attributes. What does that mean? Don't take one of these attributes and throw it away. You take one of the attributes and throw it away, you've now diminished God. He is the sum total of his attributes. Don't take one of these attributes and elevate it like there's kind of a premium list and then all the other attributes are flying coach. Okay? No, he's the sum total of all of his attributes. Now, I know there are some attributes we talk about more. We talk about the sovereignty of God and the holiness of God and forgiveness of God and those kind. We talk about those things over and over and over again. But listen, the patience of God is important to the character of God. The approachableness of God, the immanence of God is an important aspect of our Godhead. And we need to make sure that we don't elevate a few to be the most important. And some people will do that. Oh, well, we all know that holiness is the most important. No, holiness is profound in its shaping of these attributes, but God's approachableness is also an important part of his aspect. And if you take one of these aspects away, you have non-God. You don't have God as he is. And what happens is that there are people along the way that have not been content with the fullness of God of what he is, and what they've done is come in here and edit the list. Classic case, the shack. The shack is not a Christian work. The shack is somebody editing the character of God. Okay? There's a saying that says that God has made us in his image, and since then we have more than reciprocated. We have made God in our image to be like we want him, we think we are and we expect him to be. And God goes, no, you don't get to define who I am. I get to define who I am. And this is who I am. And the scriptures reveal who I am. And if I'm a God of wrath and you don't like that, don't go write a book that strips my wrath out of the story. You got to figure out what to do with wrath in the context of all of these other qualities. Does it make sense? Yep. So we have to be on guard as we listen to media and we read stories, and even in Bible studies we hear people talk about, well, God would never do that. Go, hold a second, chapter and verse right here, he did it. Well, he wouldn't do that now. Well, hold on. I mean, let's don't recarve the image here. Let's figure out what to do with some of the qualities that kind of put us on edge and figure out how that helps me to understand God better. Make sense? Okay, I've got an article. Somebody remind me to send the article to you because I was going to read it to you. I'm going to send you an article to this point. It's called Lobotomizing God. It was written in 2011. It's a brief article, but somebody will you email me?
Sure.
Okay, that way you don't get 1,000 emails. Brittany's going to email me, and it'll remind me to send that article, and I'll send that out to the class, and that'll be an encouragement to you. Let's pray. Lord, thanks for our time tonight. Thank you that as we begin to explore who you are, that one of the things that occurs to us is that maybe we've been thinking about you too small. And we want to see you in all of your greatness and your glory, your majesty, your beauty, your jealousy, your infinitude. Lord, we want to just catch a greater and greater vision of who you are. And we thank you that you're not like us. We thank you that you've made us like you, but you're not like us. And so enlarge our view. Help us to think and to read about you rightly and to never make you something that we're not. Thank you for our time tonight and the discovery we've had. We pray it in Jesus' name. Amen.